All right, I am here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's go over real quickly Putin's big press event. He usually does these things every year. He actually does do it every year. He also does multiple press events, multiple events where he speaks to people for 3-4 hours at a time. It's pretty unorthodox, I think, for a world leader to do this, but Putin does it, and he does it very well. I want you to focus in on what he said, some of the interesting points, if you can just kind of summarize for our viewers the main points that you took away from the press events, even lighter stuff, like he mentioned that he's thinking of getting married again and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting to hear Putin talk about. And then also dive into real quick. The interesting part for me was seeing how antagonistic the UK media was to Putin. They were very antagonistic, and I think you could give some insight there as well. So let's just do a quick 5-minute roundup and give your thoughts on the press event.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to say that he does two big events like this. He does lots of press conferences. Whenever he meets world leaders, he does press conferences, but he does two big events. One is when he meets the Russian media, which is what we've just seen. This is the press conference he's just had. That comes at the end of the year. And then the other one, which is usually in the early spring, which is one where he fields questions from people all over Russia, ordinary people all over Russia. So this is Putin at his classic best, 4 hours long, covers a huge range of topics, going out of his way, I should stress, to answer questions from Russia's very extensive anti-government liberal media. So he was fielding questions from groups like Christoforou and Novaya Gazeta, which are hostile to him and to his government, mainly on economic policies. He did gave a lot of questions on questions on economic policies, in which he was explaining his reasons for going for pension reform. He was explaining why Russia's prospects going forward are good. He was explaining why Russia's had to deal and how it has dealt successfully with the two big economic crises of the last 10 years, the 2008 Great Recession, and then the secondary recession that happened in 2014-15 after the oil prices crashed. And of course, he also covered a foreign policy very extensively. He'd only just got to hear about the Syria pullout that Donald Trump has announced, so he didn't touch on that very deeply, but he did talk a lot about Ukraine this time, about the Kerch Bridge incident, about the situation with Ukraine in general, and about the Donbass and the conflict in the Donbass, and about Crimea. And I should stress that on all those issues that were Ukraine related, he didn't give an inch. And he also talks a lot about the arms race that is now building up between the United States and Russia. And he talked at length about how this was brought about by US policies, by the way in which the US pulled out of arms control treaties, forcing Russia to respond, but that Russia has responded and that it is now building all its advanced range of hypersonic and other missile systems, which will successfully counter the US military and which will preserve the strategic balance. So it was a very comprehensive coverage from a political leader who has become very experienced at running these press conferences and relishes debate and conflict. And as you correctly say, there was a light moment. In fact, there are many light moments, in one in which he joked about the possibility of him marrying in the future. I don't take that completely seriously, but as I said, it gave him an opportunity to bring up a laugh.
Right.
Now, as for the media in Britain, you would never get a true sense of what happens at a Putin press conference.
Awful stuff, rated. Awful stuff. Yeah.
Awful stuff. Absolutely awful stuff. I mean, they completely misrepresent it. They make it out that this is sort of an echo chamber in which the media basically tells Putin all the things that he wants to hear and that it's all pre-programmed, which is nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And they misrepresent the fact that he takes a couple of questions, critical questions, to make it seem that there are rumblings of dissatisfaction. Putin relishes getting critical questions. And they always feature in his press conferences, in these sort of press conferences, always to a great extent, because they are his way of communicating to the Russian people that he knows their concerns. This is absolutely not a kind of press conference that a dictator runs. But you would never get that impression from reading the British media. And I mean, it really is shocking to see how they misrepresent these events. And I would finish about the British media and indeed the US media by saying that anything you read in them that Putin says, any quote from Putin, is either a misquote or a quote taken out of context, or sometimes, I'm sorry to say, an outright invention. You should never, ever base your ideas on things Putin says or on his press conferences from what you see in the Western and especially the British and American media. You want to see what he actually said, go on to his own website, Kremlin.ru, and you'll find it all there in detail, and you'll get a real sense of the kind of person he is and the kind of questions he gets asked.
Very quickly, Alexander, who are the worst offenders in the UK as far as the way they cover Putin? Who do you think covers Putin well in the UK? And what other world leaders do you think could pull off, if they wanted to, could pull off a 2, 3, 4 hour press conference?
Right, let's deal with the last question first. The answer is none of them. The only world leader who's able to pull this sort of thing off is Putin himself. I mean, I cannot imagine any other leader anywhere risking their position by conducting a press conference like this. And if they did, I predict that it would be a disaster, that they would get all their facts wrong, that they would be driven into losing their temper or making inappropriate jokes, and it would probably weaken their position so much that that's why none of them do it. So, I mean, Putin can do it. Putin has that command of the facts, that incredible memory, that erudition. I mean, he even quoted the Code of Hammurabi. This is a Babylonian king of about 3000 BC for people who don't know. He has the knowledge, the experience, and the personal command to be able to do something like this. Nobody else can.
Can I make one quick comment that came to my mind before you give the answer to the other two parts? I think the Trump rallies, it's not the same. He's not taking questions or any of that, but the rallies where he goes to his base and he speaks for like an hour, 20 minutes, kind of off script, no teleprompter. I think that's kind of Trump's analogous to the Putin conference, where he just kind of, free flows his thoughts out there. It's very different, but it's kind of the same, tactic to connect.
And I think you're absolutely right, and you're quite correct to say it's the same sort of tactic. I mean, one politician, Putin, is something of an intellectual, in fact, very much of an intellectual. So he does these very structured conversations in which he answers questions. The other, Donald Trump, is a much more instinctual and, dare I say it, empathic politician. And he does it with his rallies, but both connect very powerfully with their base and both get the sense of what their base is thinking through these things. So, in fact, there is a great deal of similarity, and I'm glad you brought up that comparison. Now, as to who covers these things well in Britain, the answer is, if you're looking at mainstream media, no one does. They're all awful, without exception. The ones that really annoy me most, if I have to say, are what used to be the newspapers of record here. That is to say, the big mainstream media outlets like the BBC, the Financial Times, the Guardian, the London Times, which used to be at least reliable in the way they reported the news, even if you could sometimes disagree with their interpretations. Now, I am sorry to say, none of them are even reliable. They are awful, and they are completely misinforming the British public about the way in which Putin governs Russia and the way in which he interacts with the Russian people and about the kind of country that Russia is. So there is no one in Britain, no mainstream media outlet in Britain that is reporting these things properly. If you want to understand what really goes on in Russia and you want British voices, I'm afraid you have to go outside the mainstream towards alternative media places like the Off Guardian, and dare I say it, though we are not obviously a British site ourselves.
Right. The Off Guardian does do some good work, and I know that
Yeah.
you're putting up a lot of links to what you read.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Duran homepage as well, so
Exactly.
people can visit Duran, and it's kind of a plug, but people can visit Duran and see how you're getting your news about what's
Yes, but can I just stress an honest plug, because we do cover this news, in my opinion, properly, and I mean we do also have a range of opinions on this, but certainly you should not look for truth, objective truth about Vladimir Putin in the British newspapers and on the BBC anymore. That stopped long ago.
Who do you think's the most moderate, before we end this discussion, the most moderate of them all, the big mainstream media?
I think that you will find occasional good pieces about Russia in The Independent. That is, it's not even exactly mainstream. It's considered a sort of newspaper, but of course it only now exists as a website. But it does have some sort of heavyweight people from when it was trying to be a sort of broadsheet newspaper. So you get people like Patrick Cockburn, you get people like Mary Dejevsky writing there. You also get odd people in The Guardian, like Simon Jenkins, and sometimes Mary Dejevsky also writes The Guardian. And every so often, very occasionally, Jonathan Friedland appears on The Guardian also. But don't basically look at The Guardian. You're far more likely to get real neocon stuff there. The Independent, slightly different, but frankly, it's a bad picture wherever you look.
All right. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much for that quick analysis on Putin's presser and taking a look at the UK media and how they cover Vladimir Putin. Guys, if you like this video, subscribe. Duran Shop, 20% off all throughout December, and you can get a copy of this in audio format at iTunes and Soundcloud. And don't forget, our description box, you will find links to our PayPal and Patreon. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.